There's a moment in every family argument where everything feels like it's about to break, the tone shifts, the heart races, and suddenly you're not just fighting about the words being said, you're fighting old wounds, old patterns, and old fears. And in that moment, it feels almost impossible to stay calm, to stay kind, to stay in control. But what if I told you that the way you handle those moments can completely change the way your family communicates? What if you could turn conflict into connection, tension into understanding, and those heated moments into opportunities for growth instead of scars? Today, I'm going to show you exactly how I do it step by step, not with perfection, but with presence. Because the real power in family arguments isn't in winning the fight, it's in keeping the relationship strong enough to survive it. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might become the turning point you've been needing. Slow the moment, not the connection, is one of the hardest skills to develop, especially inside a family where emotions don't just run deep, they run fast. When someone you love says something sharp, or when the tone shifts from calm to confrontational, your body reacts before your brain even catches up. Your heart rate rises, your voice tightens, and suddenly you're not responding to their words. You're responding to the threat you feel in the moment. That's where everything usually goes wrong. You start defending, attacking, or shutting down, not because you want to hurt them, but because the moment feels too big, too loud, too fast. That's why slowing the moment matters. Slowing the moment is not about walking away, ignoring what's happening, or pretending you're unaffected. It's about choosing to pause your reactions long enough to stay in control of your side of the conversation. When you slow the moment, you give yourself permission to breathe before you speak, to think before you respond, and to choose clarity over chaos. It's the emotional equivalent of hitting the brake before a curve. You don't stop moving forward. You just make sure you stay on the road. This pause is not weakness. It's the strongest thing you can do in a heated argument because it stops the emotional spiral where both sides keep escalating until no one remembers what the real issue was. Most people fear that slowing down looks like backing down, but it's the opposite. It's stepping into the moment with intention instead of impulse. When you take a breath, instead of raising your voice, you change the direction of the entire argument. When you answer calmly instead of reacting instantly, the other person feels something they didn't expect: safety. They feel like you're not trying to win against them. You're trying to understand with them. And that shift brings the walls down on both sides. The reason this key matters so deeply is because family arguments are emotional storms, not logical debates. And storms calm faster when one person chooses to be the anchor. Slowing the moment allows you to become that anchor. It doesn't mean the conversation becomes perfect. It doesn't mean the other person suddenly becomes calm. But it does mean you hold your ground in a way that protects both you and the relationship. It keeps the connection intact even when the conversation is uncomfortable. When you slow the moment, you're not disconnecting. You're doing the opposite. You're saying, I care enough to stay present, but I care enough about us to stay steady. That kind of presence is powerful. It shows emotional leadership. It shows maturity. It shows that you value the relationship more than the rush of defending yourself. And when you model this, it invites the other person into the same emotional space. People mirror what they feel, and calm is contagious. This skill won't develop in one day. It takes practice. It takes catching yourself when your voice starts rising, noticing when your patience is thinning, and choosing a slower, steadier response. But every time you do it, you strengthen yourself. You protect the bond. You build trust, and you remind yourself that arguments don't have to break your family. They can actually reveal your growth. Listening for the emotion, not just the words, is one of the most transformative shifts you can make in any family argument. Words are loud, sharp, and immediate. They cut through the moment, and it's easy to get caught up in them. But emotions, those are the real messages traveling underneath every sentence. Most arguments in families aren't actually about the topic being discussed. They're about someone feeling unheard, unappreciated, overwhelmed, or afraid of losing connection. When you start listening for the emotion instead of the exact words someone throws at you, the entire tone of the argument changes. You stop fighting the surface problem and start addressing the deeper need. When a family member raises their voice, the first instinct is to defend yourself. You hear the criticism, the sarcasm, the frustration. But if you train yourself to look past the tone and into the feeling, you might recognize something else. Maybe they're scared of being ignored again. Maybe they're tired of carrying a burden alone. Maybe they're hurt and don't know how to express it without sounding angry. Emotions disguise themselves as accusations because most people were never taught how to communicate their pain cleanly. And when you take their words at face value, you end up arguing with the symptom, not the source. Listening for emotion means shifting your internal question from why are they talking to me like this to what are they trying to protect inside themselves. That shift isn't easy. It requires humility, patience, and the ability to step outside your own frustration long enough to see theirs. But when you do, you begin to respond from a calmer place. You stop matching their volume. You stop getting hooked by the details. Instead, you respond to the heart of what they're experiencing, and responding to emotion always calms the moment more than responding to words ever could. When someone feels understood, even slightly, their defenses lower almost instantly. They stop needing to convince you of their pain. They stop trying to argue their way into being seen. And that's the power of listening this way. It diffuses conflict before it explodes. It creates a bridge in a moment that normally creates distance. You show them that you're not against them. You're with them, even if you disagree. But this isn't about being a mind reader. You don't have to guess emotions perfectly. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, it sounds like you're really frustrated, or I can tell this is weighing on you. Those small acknowledgments tell the other person that you're paying attention to more than their tone. You're paying attention to their experience. And when someone feels emotionally seen, arguments lose their power to divide. Most family conflicts spiral because nobody feels truly heard. Everyone becomes so busy defending their position that no one pauses to understand the feeling behind the position. But emotions are always the real conversation, whether anyone admits it or not. When you learn to identify them, you gain a kind of emotional intelligence that most people never develop. You begin handling conflict with grace rather than reaction. You stop taking things so personally because you recognize the pain behind the punch. And over time, your presence becomes the calm your family didn't even realize they needed. Protecting your peace without punishing theirs is one of the most misunderstood emotional skills in family arguments. Most people think setting boundaries means shutting someone out, proving a point, or creating distance that feels like a consequence. But real emotional strength isn't about pulling away to hurt them. It's about stepping back just enough to protect your mental and emotional clarity while still keeping the relationship intact. It's choosing space without choosing spite. That's a hard balance, especially when the people involved are the ones closest to your heart. Family conflict hits differently because you're not just dealing with the moment. You're dealing with history, expectations, unspoken disappointments, and years of emotional patterns. That's why protecting your peace matters so much. It's not selfish, it's necessary. When an argument escalates to a point where your voice gets shaky or your thoughts get tangled, that's your body telling you you're no longer in a place where you can respond wisely. You're in a place where you're reacting. And when you start reacting, you end up saying things you don't mean or absorbing things you shouldn't. That's where stepping back comes in. But there's a difference between stepping back responsibly and stepping back in anger. Responsible distance sounds like, I want to continue this, but I need a moment to think. Punishing distance sounds like silence meant to make them worry or hurt. One protects the connection. The other weakens it. Protecting your peace is about giving yourself breathing room without turning it into a weapon. When you take space with clarity, when you express why, when you affirm the relationship, when you show respect, you're not abandoning the conversation. You're simply choosing to return to it in a healthier state. That kind of boundary doesn't push the other person away. It invites them into a calmer, a more productive version of the discussion. It's emotional maturity, not emotional avoidance. The reason this matters so deeply is because most family arguments aren't actually about who's right. They're about who feels dismissed, who feels misunderstood, who feels overwhelmed. And when both people feel those things, each one starts fighting to protect their own peace. But if your protection takes something away from theirs, if it leaves them confused, scared, or disrespected, then the argument stops being about the issue and starts becoming about the hurt you created by how you walked away. That's why the way you protect yourself matters as much as the fact that you protect yourself. When you choose calm explanations over cold silence, you shift the energy. When you choose honest boundaries over emotional shutdowns, you show strength, not distance. When you choose clarity over punishment, you show that the relationship is still intact even in disagreement. And that creates trust, the kind of trust that survives conflict instead of collapsing under it. The truth is, protecting your peace isn't a one-time act. It's a practice. It's noticing when you're getting overwhelmed. It's being honest about your emotional limits. It's choosing pauses over explosions. And the more you practice it, the more you realize that peace isn't something you demand from others. It's something you create within yourself. And when you do it without punishing the people you love, you create a kind of emotional safety that transforms not just the argument, but the entire relationship. Asking questions that cool instead of fuel is one of the most underestimated skills in handling family arguments. Most people don't realize how powerful a single question can be. It can either calm the entire conversation or push it into a direction nobody can come back from. In heated moments, questions become the steering wheel. And when emotions are high, the way you steer determines whether the relationship gets hurt or healed. That's why choosing the right type of questions matters so much. They are not just words. You're setting the tone, the pace, and the emotional direction of the entire moment. When someone in your family is upset, it's easy to respond with defensiveness. You might want to correct them, explain yourself, or point out where they're wrong. But every one of those impulses fuels the fire. They make the other person feel challenged, not understood. And when someone feels challenged, their voice rises, their words sharpen, and their walls go up. The argument becomes about survival, not resolution. But when you shift from defending yourself to understanding them, everything changes. And the fastest way to make that shift is through questions that cool the moment. A cooling question is calm, neutral, and focused on clarity. You're not trying to win, you're trying to understand. Something as simple as, help me understand what you mean, softens their entire emotional posture. They move from attack to explanation. They stop bracing for your response and start reflecting on their own. A good question reminds them that you're not against them. You're right here with them, trying to figure this out together. It changes the energy instantly because it signals that you care about the message beneath their frustration. Fueling questions, however, come from impatience. Why are you always like this? Or what's your problem? Or do you even hear yourself? These questions don't seek clarity. They seek control, and control never calms an argument. It only deepens the wound. When you use questions as weapons, you teach the other person to protect themselves from you, not communicate with you. That's how families drift apart over time, not through huge betrayals, but through tiny, heated moments that were handled with fire instead of care. Cooling questions require emotional maturity. They require the ability to slow your own reaction, even when you feel attacked or misunderstood. They require you to care more about connection than victory. But when you ask these types of questions, you're doing something incredibly powerful. You're inviting the other person into a calmer space without forcing them. And people respond better to invitations than to orders. A question that cools brings perspective back into the conversation. It helps the other person hear themselves. It helps you hear them. It brings the argument back to the core issues instead of spiraling into personal attacks. And most importantly, it keeps the relationship intact while you work through the disagreement. That's the goal, not to avoid conflict, but to navigate it with enough respect and clarity that the bond remains strong. Over time, you'll see the difference. Arguments won't last as long. Tension won't escalate as fast, and your presence in a conflict will feel safer, calmer, and more grounded. That's the kind of emotional leadership every family needs, someone who knows how to ask the questions that cool, not fuel. Ending with what you want, not what you fear, is one of the most powerful shifts you can make in any family argument because it redirects the emotional destination of the conversation. Most arguments end in fear. Fear of not being heard, fear of being misunderstood, fear of losing respect, fear of repeating an old pattern. When you close from a place of fear, your words become sharp, your tone becomes defensive, and your energy becomes protective instead of connective. And the other person feels that. They feel the distance. They feel the tension. They feel the unspoken message beneath the argument. I'm scared this won't get better. But something incredible happens when you choose to end with what you truly want instead of what your fear is screaming. You shift the entire emotional meaning of the conversation. Ending with what you want means closing the moment with clarity instead of chaos. It means telling the other person what you're actually hoping for, not what you're afraid of losing. Instead of saying, you never listened to me, you end with, I really want us to understand each other better. Instead of ending with emotional withdrawal, you end with, I care about this and I care about us, doll. Ending with what you want doesn't magically fix everything, but it points the moment in the direction of healing instead of harm. It leaves the door open instead of shutting it with frustration. Most people don't realize how much the ending of an argument sticks. The last sentence becomes the memory. The last tone becomes the emotional imprint. The last energy becomes the story the other person carries into the next interaction. If that ending is rooted in fear, cold silence, sarcastic remarks, emotional distance, then the relationship absorbs that negativity. But if the ending is rooted in what you truly want, connection, understanding, unity, then the argument becomes a moment of growth instead of a moment of damage. Ending with what you want also requires emotional honesty. You have to be willing to say what you're actually longing for beneath the tension. Maybe you want peace. Maybe you want respect. Maybe you want closeness. Maybe you want to feel heard without having to fight for it. When you communicate that desire at the end of a heated moment, you remind the other person that the argument isn't the enemy, the misunderstanding is. And misunderstandings can be fixed. The relationship doesn't have to suffer for them. This approach also creates emotional leadership. It shows that even in anger or frustration, you're choosing intention over impulse. You're choosing connection over ego. You're showing the other person that there's a direction beyond the conflict, a future where the two of you can move through this moment without letting it damage the bond. When you lead with what you want, you teach the other person how to respond in a healthier way. You set the tone, you create calm, you show them that your commitment to the relationship is bigger than the argument. Over time, this practice builds emotional trust. Your family learns that disagreements with you don't end in emotional punishment. They end in clarity, care, and direction. They learn that even if the conversation gets heated, the connection won't be destroyed. And that kind of safety transforms a family's communication. It shifts conflict from something feared to something manageable. Ending with what you want doesn't just close the moment, it protects the relationship for every moment after that. Every family argument tests not just our patience, but our emotional maturity. It asks us who we want to be in the middle of heat, misunderstanding, and pressure. And the truth is, we don't rise to the level of our intentions. We rise to the level of our habits. When you slow the moment instead of the connection, when you listen for emotion instead of just reacting to words, when you protect your peace without hurting theirs, when you ask questions that calm instead of ignite, and when you end with what you want instead of what you fear, you're building habits that strengthen your relationships, not strain them. These choices don't make arguments disappear, but they make you stronger than the argument. They turn conflict into clarity and tension into understanding. They allow you to hold the people you love with gentleness, even when the moment isn't gentle at all. What you practice in these small emotional moments becomes who you are in the bigger ones. You start showing up calmer, clearer, and more grounded than you ever thought possible. And that kind of presence doesn't just change conversations, it changes families. It sets a new tone, a new standard, a new direction for everyone involved. And the beautiful thing is, this is a skill you can start building today. One breath, one pause, one calmer response at a time. Good luck on your journey towards stronger communication, deeper understanding, and healthier connections. You're capable of more growth than you even realize. Thank you for listening, and thank you for choosing to become better, not just for yourself, but for the people you love.